welcome to Lens on the World. I'm your host, Xinyu Zhang. I'm so honored today to have Virginia Senator Chap Peterson with me on the site.
Thank you, Xinyu.
And author of Factory Man, Miss Beth Macy with me. So can you introduce yourself, Miss Beth Macy?
Sure, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Xinyu. I'm Beth Macy. I'm a journalist, a longtime journalist, and I'm based in Roanoke, Virginia.
Yeah, I heard that it's very good storytelling. Especially, I read your book; it's very impressive. So, how about Senator Chap Peterson? Tell us more about your re-election because.
Sure.
I mean, November 3rd is going to come in soon.
Right. Well, I've got some questions for Beth, but before I do that, as a public service announcement to all the Fairfax County voters out there, November 3rd is Election Day. It is actually all over the state, so if you watch this in Roanoke, same thing. And I'm up for re-election, but I'm not here to promote my candidacy. I'm actually here to talk about this great book that Beth wrote. Which is really important, I think, for the economy of Virginia and the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it's glad I have you because the reason I have you twice just on the book reading. You know, he is the one of several people reading a lot of books. Especially, he likes the book of yours, Miss Bessie. Do you have any question? Ask her.
Beth, the question I had, and I have to admit, I first saw your book, I was in Roanoke last Thanksgiving. I saw it at a bookstore, and I picked it up and looked through it, but I didn't buy it. You know, I already had my arms full. And then for Christmas, my mother bought it for me for Christmas. So I got it for Christmas. And we were talking before the show, I have some friends that live in Martinsville and Bassett, but what got you interested in this story? How did you get interested in Bassett Furniture and just the whole family, and what turned you onto it?
Sure. So I've been a longtime reporter for the Roanoke Times, and a lot of my stories involve outsiders and underdogs. And when the economy tanked in 2008, I did a lot of stories about how people were getting by in the recession, and kind of one thing led to another, and I got really curious about Martinsville and Henry County because it had had the highest unemployment rate in the state for over a decade at that point. And so around 2011, I started this series called Picking Up the Pieces, and it was really looking at asking the question, like, what happens to a community when one half of its jobs go away? 20,000 jobs had gone away in just that one community alone, first in textiles, then in furniture. And I wanted to see how people were doing now. We had covered all the factory closings, but we had never gone back and reported on how people were getting by. And in the course of doing that pre-reporting, I heard about this guy in Galax, Virginia, who was originally from Bassett, but had broken off from Bassett Furniture to work for a company called Vaughn Bassett. And when all the plants in his hometown started shutting down and really in the industry, he took on Chinese imports in a court of international trade to really go to bat for his industry, but mainly for his company and for his workers. And he prevailed in that battle. And I think when one person does one thing and everyone else does the other thing, and this person succeeds, there's almost always a really good story there.
Right, right. Well, let me ask you some questions, because I'm an attorney up here, and Northern Virginia has frankly benefited from international trade, and I'll be honest, I've represented Asian manufacturers that have sold into the United States, and of course I represent consumers, but by the same token, having traveled across the rest of the state, you know, at least in my youth, there was a great manufacturing base down in Southside and Southwest Virginia and even out in the Valley. Just looking at the direction of our state, and I have some specific questions about the book, but if we look at industrial businesses in Virginia or the United States, is it possible for them to survive, or is it just inevitable in the globalization of an economy that you just can't survive paying U.S. wages? I mean, has your book kind of given you any insight on that, or what do you think?
Well, it's shown me just how difficult it is, because if you look at what he did in Galax, he's still struggling. I mean, he won his case at the International Trade Commission. He won it at the Sunset Review again in 2010. his company benefited to the tune of, I think it was $52 million in these anti-dumping duties. And he's now that the economy is getting a bit better, he is starting to see his business turn around, but it's still very hard. The workers there don't make a ton of money,
right,
but they're very grateful to have that work. So if you contrast that with, say, Martinsville and Bassett, it's night or day. I mean, people down there are still struggling. There's been some industry come in.
Right.
There are still some people working on the imported part of things, but it's a very little bit compared to what it once was.
Do you think over time, and you know, just one of the things unique about me is my wife's family is Korean, so I've been to Asia quite a few times. And Korea, you have a situation where as more jobs came in, the standard of quality rose, and the competitive wage balance kind of evened out with the United States. So there's not necessarily a competitive advantage. And in fact, I've actually talked to Korean manufacturers about relocating to the United States, because if they have an American market and they're using American raw goods, frankly, it's more efficient to manufacture that product in America rather than haul it all over the Pacific Ocean. Do you see that? I don't know China really at all. Do you see that happening at all in China, do you think?
Well, I just read a story a couple weeks ago in the New York Times. You know, they're talking about zombie factories over in China because their economy is really hurting right now. And some of the, you know, I know there's a Chinese-owned furniture factory in Marion, Virginia, I think. There's a new textile plant, Chinese-owned in South Carolina.
Right.
And that's a trend you are starting to see now. So I don't know. Haven't seen it in these areas where I've been reporting from yet, but you know, jobs are jobs, and I know a lot of people that'd be grateful to have them right now.
Sure.
Do you think the Mr. Prasad is the only person resist moving his jobs overseas? I mean, this book kind of the legacy is about 3 generations of Mr. Prasad's. Why is Mr. Prasad's story important?
I think it's a really human story. I'm not a business reporter, and it didn't really begin with the idea from that angle. I saw a person who grew up in a company town that was named for his family, where if you worked for the company, you lived in a company-owned Bassett home. You paid your light bill at Bassett Furniture Industries. And it was a really interesting way for me to learn about like the history of industry in our country, because you could look at Bassett Furniture as sort of a test case and what had happened. And I think for a variety of reasons, he decided to, as he put it, I'm going to war in 2002 when he filed this anti-dumping petition. And I think he did it for a number of reasons, for his employees, for his family, and also for like the integrity of his family name and the tradition that he had grown up with, not just furniture making, but also how you take care of the people who have, as he put it, for generations have made his family wealthy. And I think it was a really just really human story, because he really struggled there. He had gotten lots of fights with his relatives and fights with some of his customers who didn't want him to do what he did. Lots of battles within the industry, within his family. And he's not a perfect person by any means, but he is very much the hero of the story. And I think it was a great way to learn about what happened in this one community, or these 2 communities, when globalization hit.
You know what impressed me? The numbers, the exact numbers you wrote in your book. No matter like an employee, jobs, rates, everything, it's the exact numbers. I mean, is this all true stories, or have any fictions in this book? That's my question.
Don't get her in trouble.
No, I'm a journalist, and I tried very hard to footnote where in my endnotes where I got all my information. If somebody said one thing, I would run it by somebody else, and if they had a different point of view, I would try to include that. I interviewed hundreds of people and spent a lot of time with my main subject, but I didn't just take him, you know, he didn't have any editorial control over the book, in other words.
One of the points I thought you did really well, Beth, and I think it's worth repeating, is that Bassett, Virginia, believe it or not, was kind of the ground zero of Virginia back in the 1940s and 1950s. You had the governor, Stanley, coming from Bassett, and then you had A.L. Philpott, who was a speaker for generations. I mean, I came into the legislature a few years after that, but even then, when I came in, he was still such an imposing force. And they were both from Bassett, and that was really, you know, that was Virginia. That was really the power center of Virginia back in the 50s and 60s.
It was the industrial powerhouse, and it was said, and I tried to see if I could, I wasn't able to actually find the statistical proof of this, but it was said by many people for many years that Martinsville had the most millionaires per capita in the country. And there was just a lot of power.
Right.
And I think one of the lessons you could take away with this is that power is good when things are going your way, but when it's not, and you have all your employment resting on these two baskets of textiles and furniture,
right,
it makes you really vulnerable when the world changes and you're beholden to these two industries.
Well, it would be like if the federal government was to shut down, God forbid, and leave Washington, D.C. You could probably pick up a McMansion pretty cheaply up in Fairfax County.
Yeah, I mean, I can post your book on Facebook. I said, preserve the local factories. I think it's important. At least my point, I support this point. I mean, why is it important to keep manufacturing jobs in America? I think I will get back with you this question. We're going to take a 2 minutes break. So thank you for the first part of our interview, but we're going to right back with you. We are having Virginia Senator Chap Peterson with me on Channel 10. Also, we have very popular author of Factory Man, Miss Beth Macy, with us on Channel 10. Thank you so much. We will right back with you. Thank you for handling this.
Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about Rick White. Another very nice homeless man. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Only you can prevent wildfires. Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home? When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals and the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark. Here we go. Okay, let's go. Oh, okay. Ow! Oh!
Maybe there's another way.
People! The flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
Welcome back, Lens on the World. I'm your host, Xinyu Zhang. I'm having Virginia Senator Chap, Peterson, and the very popular author, Miss Beth Macy of Factory Man. We come back to why important to keep manufacturing jobs in U.S.
Sure.
How about your point?
Well, Beth, I was going to ask you, I mean, we have a presidential race that will be kicking off, or maybe it already has, where at least one candidate is really focused on China taking American jobs. And then this week, the president of China will be coming to America and having a state dinner with President Obama. And obviously, there's such a huge trade relationship between the two countries. I mean, we buy so many Chinese products at Walmart or where have you. And by the same token, a lot of people feel like China's kind of stealing our lunch. I don't, I'm a state guy. I mean, I look at things from the perspective of Virginia. From your perspective, having written about this and studied these issues, what policy should the federal government be pursuing? What should they be doing in terms of trying to regulate trade, trying to make trade fair, and trying to preserve American jobs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's such a complicated issue. I mean, it took me about a year of reporting before I really got my head around the trade, and I think that's part of the problem. Like these jobs went away very incrementally, slowly over 15, 18 years, and a lot of people in the cities where you don't run into these dying factory towns like we do here, missed it, and it didn't get reported on a lot outside of the regions where these factories were closing. But one of the things, one of my takeaways from the story is I think I said it as no one's minding the back room of this new global store. And by that, I mean, when you look at my story, you look at a third generation furniture factory owner who sees that this product is coming on the market. He thinks it's being dumped. He doesn't even know there are laws on the books going back to 1930 that protect the domestic industry from this kind of dumping behavior. And dumping means when you're selling something in another market for less than it even cost you to make it in order to put the Americans out of business. And so he didn't even know about that at first. And so that by the time he filed that suit in 2002, I think it was, he had to gather a coalition of his industry over 50%, and a lot of companies had already gone out of business. Many factories had closed, many thousands of workers had lost their jobs, and he said, why didn't the government tell us that we had this recourse? And so that's why a lot of these cases don't get filed, but it's really important that, when we were debating whether China should join the WTO in the late 90s and early aughts, and all the politicians said, it's going to be a win-win. We won't, they actually said, we won't lose jobs, we'll simply export our goods to a growing consumer class in China. But I mean, I'm still waiting for that half of the equation, because and maybe it will happen, but it certainly hasn't happened yet. And there hasn't been very sensible things put in place, in my opinion, based on lots of research and lots of interviews, to take care of these people who lost their job through no fault of their own because of this trade. And so the book takes a hard look also at trade adjustment assistance and these actual real workers who lost their jobs, and how they think that program could be just more practical for them. And but a lot of them, even those who did go back and get retrained for jobs, get retrained for what they said. I went and I got a job to become a medical records clerk or paralegal, but there were no jobs in those fields in Martinsville, Virginia, the year I finished. And it's just very sad. It seems like there's disconnects at any number of places along the way. This big thing happened. The politicians, I guess they understood it was going to happen. Wall Street certainly cheered it. Every time the factories would close, the stocks would go up, and the little people really got hurt. And no one seemed to really care.
Well, I will analogize it to, You know, 15 years ago, nobody had a flat screen TV. Very few people had laptops, and nobody had an iPhone. And now everybody has these products. Everybody, even poor people. I mean, middle class, we all do.
Yep.
And those products, by and large, are manufactured in China or somewhere else and shipped over here. And we buy them, and our economy, while it feels like it's about a 90% service economy right now. I mean, we got people teaching yoga. We got people like me practicing law. We got people making TV programs. I mean, we don't make things, you know, I'm probably like yourself. I mean, 3 of my 4 grandparents grew up on farms. And we, as a society, have kind of gotten away from we actually make things, or we rely on other people to make things. And you know, maybe I'm an old fuddy-duddy. I mean, I have this discussion with my teenagers when I try and tell them to go get a summer job, and they're like, Dad, nobody does that anymore. It's all internships. And, you know, I do worry that in this country, we don't have the same initiative that, say, back in the 1940s, we were building, you know, a ship a day during World War II. And we don't have those types of skills anymore, it seems to me. And maybe, again, I'm being overly negative, but I do wonder if more and more our economy is not just based on people throwing pieces of paper at each other, as opposed to actually doing
emails
things.
And
emails. We just email each other all day long.
Yeah.
So that's why one of the reasons why I really loved your book. I found it fascinating, and again, I knew people from Bassett, but I feel like the issues are larger, that China and some of these countries are making things, and we are so reliant on them. It really makes me worried.
I have a question. Do you think have any way can rescue the local factories, then like get the funding from a federal government? Or I really like is the factories, the Mr. Precise factories made the products. I really like in my home personally. I just wondered, that's very fancy things, very good quality things, can possible to export it to other countries. They buy it, make this local factories survive. And that's my question.
I think one thing we can all do, and it takes a little bit of work, and maybe sometimes it costs a little bit more, but I think we can all pay more attention to where products are made. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying, I mean, I have an iPhone right here, I love it, but given a choice between, for instance, our dishwasher broke last year, and you know, I lived with that for a couple months, and that got old. And so, rather than go out to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy, you know, the one that looked best with my other appliances and had a pretty good review, I spent 5 minutes on the computer before I went to see if there was one made in America. And sure enough, there was one made in Kentucky by Maytag. And it happened to be on sale. It was very competitive with the prices of the imports. And so, and I was like, oh, I should be walking the walk here that I've been writing. And it was fairly easy, but it took me like having to learn that, because I know these people that work in this factory now. I know many of them well, and I see how their lives are dependent on this work, and that some entire families work in this factory. And I think about that, and I know that that there's a person or a number of people at the other end of that consumer decision when we buy something. And so I'm trying to be more careful, and I can't do it all the time. I'm sure this isn't made in America, for instance, but when I can do it, I try to.
Right. No, I agree with that. I mean, I bought a Ford Fusion a few years ago, and it's been a great car. But you know, my contemporaries all drive Toyotas and such like. But I agree with you. I mean, American-made products are out there. You got to look for them. The other thing I would say, and I'm speaking sort of from the state level, you know, we do so much contracting in Virginia. We have so many federal contractors in Virginia. And one of the things I've been focused on as a politician is to all the subcontracting that comes out of our Virginia-based contractors, trying to keep that in state. So if they have back office work, someone to do their website, someone to do their computer support, someone to try and keep that, and again, I'm speaking parochially of Virginia, but try and keep that in the United States or keep it in Virginia, because all of those are jobs.
Exactly.
And those are, even those types of skills jobs are getting more and more exported over to India.
Yep. We've
So
got a Fortune 5 company here that I won't name, but I happen to know that they have people doing a lot of their tech back-end work on immigrant visa. And I write about immigrants. I have lots of immigrant friends. I am not opposed at all. But I know why they're doing it. It's because they're paying them a little bit less.
Sure,
And
no
I
doubt
just
about it.
think that is, you had the big story with Disney. They caught Disney doing that last a couple months back. And I just think that is terrible. And I think we should look at the companies that are doing this, and we should look for companies, we should put our money with the companies that are not doing that.
I think I totally understand your point. I also support the local job, local factory. Also, Chap Peterson is here. When you make the policy, of course you want like local benefits. Of course, Miss Bessie wants everything made probably in U.S., in America. I was born in China. I tell you the truth. When I went back to China, the products even more expensive than U.S., the same brands, things, then we have to come back to the U.S. buy the things. I mean, a lot of people benefit from the products made in China here. I'm deep feeling about that. But in China, what they cost, the environment costs, I mean, the people, the workers from remote local rural areas come to the cities, then they only gain the pennies or in the hours at the beginning. Later, the more raise for their raise more a little bit more. But a lot of things benefit, like a big company, Apple companies, they gain a lot of benefits, profits. I mean, now China's economy kind of slowing down. A lot of things they need to fix that. I mean, it's a lot of costs. Thank you so much. Of course, I learned something. It's better we want to adapt to changing economy or resist it. So thank you so much. Have a conversation with you.